Gentlemen, hey, congratulations on this documentary that came out this week, right? Dave not coming back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So this is a very tragic story. Why tell this story? Because this is very personal, and this is something that that it's actually very difficult to explain to the public.
Who starts, Don?
So I start, shall I? Yeah, and on my side, we wanted the story to be told. Actually, Dave wanted the story to be told what we're doing, and then after that, the natural thing was to actually try and inform everybody of exactly what had happened, and how it had happened, and why we were doing what we're doing. So it was to try and get the information out to the whole world. Really, anyone that wanted to know should know. And yes, it was a tragic story, but it had to be told correctly, and not in a melodramatic way. And I think that this documentary has really hit it on the nail very well. Thank you.
On my side, it was there were multiple things. One is that when we met with everyone, so we met with Don and the other divers, it was clear that completing the film was also their desire, and it was part of a full closure process by saying, okay, now it's really completed on every level, because there was still this movie hanging which wasn't completed. And on my side, I was fascinated by the tragic aspect of it, but the tragedy in the literary sense. It's like when you take a Greek tragedy and you see the downfall of someone for the exact same reason that made them the heroes that they were. So it's the same drive, the same energy, the same thinking that is being put into mounting an expedition was also what could lead to stuff that you just cannot predict. And the resonance with the classical tragedy was like, okay, this is a very strong story to be told.
So when did you start your involvement, Jonah?
I first heard of the story in 2012, so it was 7 years after the events, and because it's a kind of well-known story in the diving community. Like it wasn't the biggest secret. Most divers knew it. Most of them had followed the events live. They had a blog. Most of the technical divers know Don either personally or by name. And I contacted Don in 2014. That was the first contact, 2 years later. And I was shaking. So I had seen some interviews of him on YouTube, and I knew his voice. So when I rang, it took me, 2 months before I made up my mind to actually call. And I hear his voice on the phone. I'm like, oh, I recognize this voice. And Don said, yeah, anytime. Drop by and come to South Africa. So we met, and this is how it started.
Don, for you, it's obviously very difficult to revisit everything, especially, I'm actually surprised that you didn't have like permanent PTSD and that you would still go into the water to recreate. Could you talk about doing those type of scenes?
Well, I think I look at things slightly differently. It was a traumatic event, but it was something that we do because we enjoy doing it. And when you're doing that sort of thing, you accept the fact that it's a high risk event, but you always take the look at the risk and analyze the risk and make it so that you mitigate that risk. And that's the approach that we take on any dive like that. So this was just an extension of what we normally do, and we do it on a relatively daily basis. So when that happened, you deal with it as events unfold. So I never look back on that as a morbid event. I never for 1 second thought that I wouldn't go back in the water, even when I was in the water waiting to come out and doing the decompression. It was a natural thing to do, and I had a course in 2 weeks after that, and I was still intending to go do that course, but obviously I didn't. People look at it and say, well, would you never, why would you go back to Bushman's? It's such such a daunting place. Well, it is, but it's also a magic place. So, you know, Dave didn't come back, but everything is a reminder of a good time, not a bad time. So all the time you're looking back on it because it was a good event in that sense. So I've never for 1 second considered that to be a morbid event at all. And you know, Dave still lives on in my mind, and still effectively dies with me. Yeah, so it's not not a sad event.
Jonah.
It took me a long time to believe that. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
This is what Don had said for quite a while, and it took me, when we first met, it took me a long time to actually believe that there is no trauma. There is no, they don't, especially Don, don't look at it as being traumatic. And for us who are not exposed to that kind of stress, like not nearly enough. My biggest stress is if my coffee machine is going to be working in the morning. And here comes someone who went through all of that and says, no, it is not traumatic. It takes a while before I understand how literal Don is when he says that. And we try to convey that in the film. So at some point, right after his accident, Andre, his partner in crime when it comes to diving, she says, what is he gonna do now? Like, what is he gonna do if he doesn't dive? And most of the audience were surprised by this sentence. Like, the man just came out of the water, is going to a chamber, and we don't know if he's gonna survive. And the question they're asking is, what is he gonna do if he doesn't dive? And it was just a way to convey how they felt, actually.
Don, for yourself, what was going through your mind as you were ascending from your near accident? I mean, that was a very, very close call on your part.
I could probably talk for the next 5 or 6 hours on that. Really, each event generated its own thought processes. Right from when I had the controller crack, to stopping, to sorting out my gas at that point, to thinking that I would go on down, but then realizing I couldn't go down. And that was the first few seconds, if you wish, of the start of the events that then ended effectively 12 hours later. So, and then all the time you're saying, okay, what have I got to do next? And at that early point, it was, okay, I can't go down. And this is thought process. You're actually processing incredibly quickly. So no, I can't go down. I've got to leave. And then I come up, and you just work with what you've got to work with now. And if you fast forward to the very end of the dive, which is effectively the longest part of the dive where I'm still and decompressing, but then it breaks down finally to the point where I need to breathe. And that's what I'm thinking then. I need to breathe. It's difficult to breathe, so I shouldn't breathe too often. So I'll slow everything down for that. And all the time being in control, even though it doesn't look like I'm in control. And at some stage, I don't even know what planet I'm on, but I'm still dealing with what happens at the time. So it's multifaceted, really. So as I say, I could talk for quite some time, as Jonah knows.
Yeah, I do know. We had a 7-hour interview that we did with Don for the movie. And there was so much to say and so much to tell about this specific part of the dive. But there's so much you can say in an hour, in a 90-minute movie. But the intricacies of moment to moment, the mental state, also the technical aspect of it is fascinating in itself.
Jonah, for yourself, you had to basically create some new footage and utilize old footage. What was going through your own mind as you're watching the old footage of the divers as they descended into the cave?
It was the starting point. So when I started watching there was two things that made the film possible. It was Don's collaboration and the possibility to use the footage. If we did not have the footage, it would have been very difficult to tell the story. It would have been maybe an interview, but not a documentary in the sense that we were hoping to have. But we did, the footage was there, we had access to the footage, there was 14 hours of it. And when I watched it, I knew one thing. This is the only access we have to Dave as an editor. This is the only stuff I have about Dave. There's nothing else I can use to actually put him alive. And it's footage I didn't film myself. So it's not that I managed to either have a vision as a director or ask the questions I wanted to ask. This is what I had, and this is the starting point of the rest of the film. Everything else has been tailored to that size. So it became, we're going to have a parallel story. Dave was trying to make a film in 2005, and Don is trying to make a film in 2017. And we would have these parallel stories working on and actually completing each other as they go along. So you hear the cameraman, the first director, asking questions to Dave, and then you hear me asking questions to Don. And you see the two films moving one with the other. Second, Dave had a clear idea of what he wanted to do. There was a lot of technical explanations, explaining about the rebreather, explaining about the stuff. And it's very difficult to give it emotional value. So the audience, if they're not interested in the technical aspect of it, they would not connect to Dave. But this is the only footage we have of Dave. So how do you work with that? And the decision was to actually see him in the outtakes when the cameraman is saying, come down, go up, stop here, repeat. And all of a sudden we see someone playing with the camera, right? And the emotional connection of the audience becomes much stronger. This was the tool that I had in the editing to integrate that footage. And third was the underwater footage, which Don shot with my brother. So my brother is the underwater cameraman. And we started with a very complex shot list, very difficult to actually rehearse. Don can testify about that. They had to memorize the whole chain of all the shot lists because they cannot communicate underwater to say, okay, now this, now that. We did this for a few days, and after that, my brother said, fuck off, basically. Just let me dive with Don, and let me document how Don dives, how does he teach, how does he decompress, how does he get excited about going in his cave or in Boesmansgat cave? So there would be these 2 hours of Don diving and Marwan documenting in a cinema direct way underwater footage, which made the visual style of the movie.
What were some of the misconceptions that people didn't understand about the incident with David Shaw that this documentary dispelled? Were there any?
May I jump in, Don?
Yeah, I didn't know who the question was to.
Oh.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's what people go through emotionally. Like divers are, especially cave divers, are a different species than we are. There is myself not being a cave diver and having a brother who is. So it's like this is how I got access to the inner lives of. So when they talk about let's plan for accident, if this happens, this is gonna happen. If I die, you leave me there. If this is. And you're like, is that, it took me a while before I understood that they are literal about it. It's not a pause, it's not acting, it's not behaving as if we want to show that this is stuff that we are cool with. It is what they deal with regularly in a very mature way, but mature, of course, I mean in a very systematic way. It took me a while to really understand what it is, and I took it hard to convey it through the film, and not to convey the melodramatic aspect of it. Oh, now the slate came up and they are saying someone is missing. And you look at them and you feel that people are calm. There's not this extroverted panic, even though interiorly they might be boiling, but it's not extroverted panic. But this had to be shown exactly as it is. And the temptation of a filmmaker is to over dramatize, because this is what we need. Whereas here the drama was so big that I actually tried to tone it down, and the more I toned it down, I felt the more it would display this aura of sensationalism and, you know, tragedy in the common sense of way, which is not what they go through. Correct me if I'm wrong, Don.
Very, very well said. That really puts it in a nutshell. I think you've not given the dun 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 music. You've portrayed it exactly as it happened, and I think you've done that incredibly well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Don, if you had a chance to go to redo this again, but knowing that it would have been a tragic ending, would you guys still would have gone through this again?
You'd never do anything knowing that it would have a tragic ending. You would not go into a dive believing that there would be a problem, because you've always mitigated the risk. So all the time you're saying, okay, if this goes wrong, this is what we do. So there's no way that you would ever go into a dive saying, okay, someone is going to die on this dive. It's just not what you do. And in fact, if you have a feeling at any time, any one of the divers that was on that trip, that have actually had the feeling that there was something going wrong, and we say it in the documentary, then you just don't dive. And anyone could have called at any point. And that is very important, because you don't want someone in the water that's actually thinks that there is a problem, because that problem will happen. You just don't work like that. So there's no way we would do that dive if we didn't think that we could do it, and that we'd mitigated every risk. And as soon as a risk pops up that would actually cause a problem, we would stop it there and then. You wouldn't go into it. As Johan rightly said, Jonahs rightly said, the whole dive is looking at it. This is the risk. We accept this. If anything goes wrong, this is what we're going to do about it. And it's not, if this goes wrong, then I will die. It's if that did happen, then okay. We always say there's probably more likelihood of dying on the way to a dive as opposed to actually in the water. That's really the way you look at it. So, yeah.
Okay, well, let me just wrap up with one last question, because this is a fascinating story and it unfolded like a movie, which is very enthralling. But when audiences get to watch this documentary, what is the one most important lesson that you hope that they would take away from watching this film? Either you could answer this.
Over to you.
Yeah, I can talk hours about this.
Yeah,
it's the question that drives the whole editing. There is a cathartic value to watching a tragedy on screen, because it bounces back to your own life. So you see this happening, and it makes you think of your own mortality, of your own fragility, of your own. Maybe the mitigating risks is beyond what we are usually used to as normal suburban, like urban human beings. But for example, Don breathing for hours and hours on his own and saying there's no one else who can do that for us. We can connect to that. If we have someone who is sick, who is in terminal phase of cancer, for example, the situation is exactly the same. The emotions are exactly the same. The tragic aspect of it, of saying there is nothing no one can do, but living the moment by moment until it ends. These kind of strong emotions have a cathartic value that I hope would stick with the audience once they get out of the movie, independent of the diver. And I know that divers would even take even more specific stuff to their sport and to the way they mitigate risks and think about their families and think about diving.
And for you, Don, what were you hoping for?
Well, I think the story has been told correctly, and everything that was said there was actually spot on. And I think that also the way this story has been told, it doesn't necessarily need to be about diving. People may think, well, I'm not going to go to this film because it's a diving film. But you actually don't even feel that you're in the water when you watch the film. It's so true to life. And it can be applied to any situation, I believe. And it, to me, I've given talks on this film and almost in a motivational aspect, because what it boils down to is you need to do what you need to do now, and you just, that's all you can do. And if you decide that you can no longer do it, then that is correct. You can't do it. And one of the sayings that I have now, which really goes from Ford's saying, believe you can, believe you can't. Either way, you're right. And my saying is, believe you can, because you can. And at no time did I personally think that it wouldn't come out. And when the book was being written, I suddenly realized that's exactly how I was thinking. And this film, I believe, puts that across well. So anyone that watches this, that listens to the story, can think of, you know, what needs to be done, and this is what I'm going to do. And I believe that, you know, you could take water out of this story, and it would really be a magic story in itself.
Excellent answers. Hey, gentlemen. Hey, thank you very much for speaking with me. I highly recommend everyone watching on Dave Not Coming Back, because this is a very fascinating story, and it did actually unfolded like a movie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.